Hi, everybody. Jake Smith, Bill Colley with you for another Boardwalk Potatoes podcast. Bill, just when you think politics couldn't get any worse, any dirtier, you see what's going on the past several days. The president, though, fighting back today, and he is clearly accusing the Socialist Democrats of being in cahoots with the fake news media. And you know what? Good economic news came out on Friday, and then he gets hit with this story that he allegedly disparaged World War I soldiers who died fighting in the First World War in Europe. Your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I don't know that any of us personally knew any of those guys who died back in 1917, 18, fighting in Europe. So I
I knew people who came back from that war. My grandfather came back from that war.
But he didn't. The president obviously didn't know anybody who fought in that war, so it seems a stretch he would disparage anyone. Certainly takes, as you point out, it takes the heat off Nancy Pelosi. It takes the eyes off of the economic news. Did you see what Glenn Greenwald wrote in The Intercept about all of this, where you get anonymous source stories that come out? He said, right. This is not the first time this has happened involving Trump, and then other media calls the very same sources because they know who these people are. And then they say, we've confirmed it. What you've only confirmed is the same people who made the allegations in the first place.
Jennifer Griffin, I thought, hurt herself professionally with her reporting over the past couple of days. Yeah, she confirmed that the same people said the same type of thing, but there's no evidence at all to support this. And on top of this, now we see the termites coming out of the woodwork, that Trump disparaged Vietnam veterans. And then all the friends of John McCain now are coming out. Well, he didn't want the flags lowered to half-staff when John McCain died. Hell, I didn't want the flags lowered to half-staff when John McCain died.
Yeah, and Jennifer Griffin said half-mast, and that's, of course, a nautical term, but it's not a land-based term. I just want to remind her, if you're going to be reporting, you got to be really precise on these matters. The next thing we're going to hear is that Trump's been disparaging ambulance drivers and
first responders.
Yeah, and that he doesn't like Santa Claus. I mean, these things are going to come out one after another from here until Election Day. And it's going to get mightily intense because they have to find, as you see, the polls have been closing the last few weeks. There's a very nervous crowd over there on the American left because they thought with coronavirus they had him. And then the economy starts turning around because that's the biggest worry.
And they did not want any positive economic news before November 3rd. That's why they've kept the country basically shut down. They didn't want any positive economic news. They didn't want any signs of a recovery from this corona pandemic to show up before Election Day. Surprise, it started to happen.
And keep in mind, New York and California are still shut down. Those were going to go Democrat anyway. So the economy's already improved to the point where 8.5% unemployment, that's in all of the red states. Those are states where Mr. Trump will be competitive, and he could wrap this thing up. So there's no advantage to them in keeping those couple of big blue states shut down. And so you've got to come up with these other stories. I am hopeful, though, that at some point, because you see, John Kelly hasn't said anything about this to my knowledge yet. I've been out of
the person who's suspected of saying this, John Kelly, former chief of staff at the White House. He's the one who's suspected of leaking this information about this so-called disparaging remarks, these disparaging remarks about World War I soldiers.
Again, if Kelly isn't speaking, and at some point the pressure is going to grow here, I've got to believe that when John Bolton, who has an axe to grind already with the president, says, I was there, I heard none of this.
Right. I mean, Bolton could have jumped on board the Swift boat, so to speak. Using that term, Swift boat, Bill, but he didn't. Bolton said, "Listen, if it was true, I would have put it in my book."
Well, how do you think Trump supporters, though, actually look at all of this? We've been here before.
And it's funny. I put that on Facebook yesterday. Do you think that what's happened over the past 36 hours has changed one Trump supporters vote, Bill? Not one. I don't think not one has come forward on my Facebook page to indicate that it did. So who are they talking to? They're talking to those who might be on the fence, and they're talking to independents.
I made a point to you yesterday, and we were having a conversation about this, but I got thinking about it driving home last night. back when Eisenhower was president in the late 1950s, he grew so fed up with the generals at the Pentagon.
The military-industrial complex, as he called it.
These were all his junior officers from World War II were now running the Pentagon in the 1950s. And he said each one of these guys would give up an entire brigade to get a new star on the shoulder. Now, we're dealing with people here who they don't like President Trump because he's talking about ending endless wars.
Right.
And these are men who have to advance their careers. It's a little more difficult.
For warfare.
Sitting behind a desk at NATO headquarters or at the Pentagon is not going to do it. But if you're leading in combat, or you're at least in a theater of war, an ongoing theater of war, you have a chance to advance much more quickly. President Trump comes along, he either slows your career advancement down or he ends it by ending these wars, which he's talking seriously about doing. Do you think that perhaps that they would like to see him leave as soon as possible because he's interfering with their plans?
Yeah, I mean, war is big business to the Pentagon, is it not? As much as I hate to say it, that's
right.
what it is.
And even though Kelly and Mattis are gone, they're still part of that milieu, if you will.
No question about it.
And I think that they're reflecting those voices they hear inside the Pentagon and the frustration they have because a lot of these people, well, look, if radio dried up tomorrow, I wouldn't have anywhere to go. So I guess I can I can see where they're coming from. It's just that I don't think that they have the best interests of America at heart. They've got their own personal interests at heart. And so they've got to do whatever they can to remove the president.
And if you have a son or daughter who could be fighting in those waters, in a potential war, or are in the service right now, how do you think about that? Now, Rush mentioned it on his show the other day. Trump is really the first anti-war president in our lifetime. Most of those who have been in the White House have not hesitated to use our young men and women to go to war and continue those wars. We're almost in Afghanistan, my friends, 20 years. President Trump is the only one that's talked about ending this war in Afghanistan, and I'm sure that's got the Pentagon rankled a little bit too, right?
Well, if he is as rash as people try to portray him as, remember when we had the opportunity to do a strike on Iran, and then he decided that we were going to pull back because he thought it over and realized that he thought the human carnage was going to be too much beyond, it was not going to be reciprocity, whatever you want to call it, or
yeah.
I've forgotten the word that is actually used, but he pulled back. Now, this is not a man who does things in a rash manner. This is somebody who actually thought about humanity on the other end. It doesn't make sense then that he would walk around disparaging veterans of the war, World War I and Vietnam.
What is the old saying in Matthew chapter 7? By their words, by their deeds, you shall know them, right?
Right.
Has Trump done anything to indicate that he would put our military, our young men and women at risk? He's done everything he can to place them above board in every decision that he's made. Do you remember the comments and the response from Lindsey Graham and other deep staters in Syria when President Trump wanted our troops out of Syria? They went nuts. What do you mean you're going to pull troops out of Syria? Oh, Russia's going to the vacuum. I mean, these people could have been spokespeople for the Hoover Vacuum Company, for crying out loud.
Well, one other thing I think that, and maybe this is not necessarily the president's motivation, but all of these people who say we have to be in all of these hot spots around the world, we're going to spend twice as much money this year as we bring in, right?
Yep.
You've got a government that will be $30 trillion in debt unofficially shortly. Nobody really knows what.
Bill, 6 months ago, I said we were going to be a $30 trillion debt by the end of this year. People told me I was nuts.
You cannot afford a military and Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And what the American people have to realize is something's got to give here because we cannot continue to print money to cover our pandemic crises. And so at some point, all of these people who are saying, no, we must do this, we need to do this.
We have to stay in Germany. We can't pull troops out of Germany. Oh, no, we can't do that, right?
There's got to be a day of reckoning, and that day of reckoning hits, you got to make up your mind. Do you continue to police the world and allow your people then to just forage for food and live beneath bridges for shelter? Or do you focus at home and realize you can't play global policeman? And President Trump has been trying to negotiate all of this and walk through that so-called allegorical minefield for the last several years. And if he gets pushed out of the way, it's same old, same old.
Well, the biggest problem is, Bill, as you know, it's not the Socialist Democrats, it's his own party that frequently does not support him and does not back him up. The thing with Syria last year of President Trump's decision to pull troops back. The Kurds are going to die. Do you remember? Did the Kurds get annihilated? I think they're still around, aren't they?
They died under in larger numbers under the globalist George H.W. Bush.
Yes, correct. Now, you talked about the polls. I don't believe in polls, especially at this point in time. We're less than 2 months before November 3rd, but I do look at trends in those polls. Those trends are not good news for Joe Biden. And every time he's away from a teleprompter, Bill, he looks worse and worse and worse. I mean, I just got a call from Scotland an hour ago asking me, is Biden really going to debate Trump? I said, we'll see. I doubt it. What say you?
I heard some of those comments out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania the other day, and all I could think of was that scene in Blazing Saddles where Gabby Johnson gets up and it just goes on and on and on. And finally, one of the other fellows in the meeting gets up and says, that is, some of the finest authentic Western gibberish I've ever heard. It's the same type of gibberish coming out of Biden's mouth. And his claim about Edison not inventing the light bulb, right. Nobody fact-checked that. Where's the Washington Post and Glenn Kessler on that? Because
he was in Kenosha last week, and he starts rambling about the economy and says, I better shut up or they're going to shoot me. He was in Kenosha, Wisconsin, for crying out loud.
Yes. The Edison business, he said he disparaged, a great American hero and inventor in Edison. Edison did invent the modern light bulb, and
That's
it was
correct.
Former employees.
Certainly the filament that was the changing technology that made the incandescent light bulb later what it is, right?
But Biden, this is where mainstream media should say, hey, that's wrong. But a lot of people are going to walk around and actually repeat what he said, especially liberals, and say, well, Edison didn't really invent the light bulb. So now they're rewriting even more of American history behind the scenes.
Well, again, when you have this coordinated effort on behalf of magazines like The Atlantic, and I mentioned to you the other day that if we ever have a shortage on toilet paper again, The Atlantic is the perfect solution for that, because that's all that it's good for, is use where the sun doesn't shine. Now, as far as Biden is concerned, Bill, I don't even see him getting to the finish line, let alone debating President Trump at the end of this month. What do you think?
That means Kamala is going to be at the top of the ticket very, very soon. If someone actually will point out and say, "Do an emperor has no clothes," and say that this man has lost his mind, then I guess by default she moves up a slot, and then they pick someone else.
Well, that's what they're whatever their lead delegates are, whatever they call these super delegates, I guess they call them. They would then select someone to replace Biden on the ticket. How feasible do you think that possibility is? I think it's a real possibility. I just don't see someone with dementia getting through the grueling schedule for the next several weeks to get through till mid-October, let alone late October.
Do you think Elizabeth Warren is salivating somewhere in Massachusetts right now?
Yes, I most certainly do. Well, we've never seen anything like this, but you've said it before. We're going to see more of this every day. It's going to be another one of these things coming out. Just a reminder how nasty and mean President Trump is. Again, I think it comes down, Bill. At the end of the day, people are going to say to themselves, the economy is getting better. Who do I want managing this recovery? Joe Biden or Donald Trump? I think that's a very easy decision for most voters, and that's what it's going to be.
Well, when I grew up a couple of hours drive from Rochester, New York, that's a heavily Democrat Party territory in Monroe County, New York.
It was heavily industrialized. It was very heavily industrialized, which would account for unionized workers and more Democrats there than Republicans in Rochester, no?
On the other hand, if I was in a restaurant eating the other day and some angry group of Democrats came and chased me out of the restaurant, smashed my drinking glasses, and I had to run for my life, am I going to be voting to enshrine this in government come November? Or am I going to decide that perhaps I'm better off if I go with President Trump at law and order?
That is a decision that most voters are going to have to make. Now, as you know, back in 1968, the the visuals of batons and riots and unrest helped to propel Richard Nixon into office, because there were a lot of Americans who were not comfortable with America's cities being in total disarray. Is it the same effect, do you think, in 2020? I think the country's different now than it was back in 1968.
Yes, but this is metastasizing, and it's now reaching into smaller and smaller cities. Kenosha, less than 100,000. Rochester might be less than 200,000. So it's not Portland and Chicago. It's now starting to show up in smaller cities. And when it starts reaching down, it reaches places. I live in a city of about 55,000 people at the moment. If it reaches here, well, this is heavily Republican territory, but you've got other cities all over the country. Saginaw, Michigan. You've got Altoona, Pennsylvania. All of these types of places that could see some of this erupt. And if they do before Election Day, then it's going to start hammering this home, that one party is the party of lawlessness, and the other, well, at least the president is saying enough.
Your listeners in Idaho, what are they saying with respect to what's going on politically? What are you hearing from them?
Well, now you've got to remember, much of what transpired with these stories about Trump disparaging veterans and war dead came about after I walked away from the microphone on Friday morning, and I'm not returning for a few more days. We're going to be burning up some vacation time here. However, this is so solidly, I would say that of all of the, maybe not the reddest state in the union, it's pretty close. Maybe Wyoming is just a slightly tinge more red than Idaho, but yeah, these are the last. I think corners of America where you could still get the same attitudes out of people that you might have in 1958. They haven't changed much when it comes to their worldview.
The country's changed a lot, but people in your part of the country have not, huh?
No. Well, the newspaper tries to push that idea, but the newspaper isn't even going to be in print tomorrow. They've announced they're going to take the day off from printing.
Wow.
So there's no clout there. The mainstream media is still trying to push this idea that even in some of these more red parts of the country, things are changing. But I don't see it at all. In fact, I see people here getting ready to push back if they have to. There's going to be a backlash coming, and the left's not going to like it.
I think here in Delaware right now, and we're dealing with a lot of, how can I say, our government here, state government, is really taking orders from Pelosi and company, and it's starting to show. They're going after people now in their homes. Our governor here has issued an executive order: 10 or more people in your home. If you're having a prayer group, because your church is closed, you have a prayer group coming to your house, everybody has to wear a mask, and they're going to enforce it. Well, how are they going to enforce it? For years, they told us that what happens inside somebody's house behind closed doors is none of our business. Isn't that what they told us, Bill?
I'm going to tell you something right now. I don't endorse this by saying it. People sometimes think if you make a prediction, it's an endorsement. But I believe that people are going to start, if that becomes the norm, because Joe Biden would keep us wrapped up in a lockdown until he says we find a vaccine, which may be way out in the future.
Right.
They start coming in and trying to break people up who have a picnic in the backyard or a prayer meeting. Somebody somewhere is going to pull out.
Or the threat of that, Bill. How about the threat of something like that at the state level? Will that then push people to vote or pull the lever for Trump in November? What do you think?
Well, I still see poll numbers that say a lot of people actually approve of keeping people wrapped up in masks. So that part of the country is already brain dead. It's just that there will be people who start to say enough. And if there's enough pushback, I don't think government really wants to be involved in putting out thousands of little brush fires as people finally start fighting back against all of this tyranny. That is not something that, again, we can't afford so many things right now because of the debts we have. I don't see how they can be trying to impose martial law on a country that, and I know enough people in law enforcement here in this part of the world who want simply nothing to do with that. So they're barking up the wrong tree if they think they're going to be able to pull this off beyond a few blue states.
You've been watching the Boardwalk Potatoes podcast. Jake Smith here on the Delmarva Peninsula, Bill Colley in Twin Falls, Idaho. We do this every week. Bill, I've got some constitutional issues that I'm going to be talking about on our podcast this week. What do you have in mind?
I got a couple of warnings, speaking of warnings, about the future of talk radio if the Democrats get control of the government. In fact, people will be seeing that. I've scheduled that to pop up a little bit later this evening. And I think that I'm also going to be talking just a little bit. Well, I did some beer reviews. Not that I see, I'm not so sure that people are as interested in beer reviews as they are in the movie review you did. But what's interesting, even though I've had fewer views on the beer reviews, I've had people dropping beers off to me.
Now, I could think of, man, I never get people dropping beer off to me at the studio. I mean, wow, that's fantastic, Bill.
People are showing up and they'll hand me just a can of something or a bottle of something and say, well, try this and tell us what you think. And these are not people who are brewers. These are just regular people who are curious as to what my thoughts would be. I'm not one of these guys. I can't sit there and talk in beer terminology. I can just talk in some basics. Is it bitter? Is it mild? But yet people see a few videos and all of a sudden they say, well, you got to try this. You got to let people know.
Is Mr. Colley the luckiest man in the country? People drop beers off for him to taste. How about that? Man, you talk about luck, Bill.
I shouldn't have been reviewing women between the ages of 18 and 58. It's
well, my closing comment today, and all our podcast viewers can think about this. At Mass this morning, my pastor, Monsignor James Burns of St. Jude's in Eddystone, Pennsylvania, Traditional Society of St. Pius X Parish, said that the biggest problem right now with this country is this political correctness. That is, in his eyes, the biggest problem with this nation right now, the root of all the evils, is this political correctness. Bill, I'll give you the last word, and then we'll say goodbye.
Labor Day is tomorrow, of course. For people who are watching this next week, that I guess is irrelevant, but I'll just point out I will not be laboring. I'm probably going to go out and do some bird watching, take a break, one of the rare breaks I have from my media life.
Well, we're going to see plenty of bird brains in the mainstream media this week. Bill's going to be doing some bird watching in Idaho. Bill, it's going to be, man, we're going to be very busy for the next couple of months and beyond, but have a great couple of days off, and you and I will circle back next week.
We will.
This has been Boardwalk Potatoes. Bill Colley, Jake Smith, have a great day.